Hi everyone and welcome to the Grape Explorer. In today's video we're going to be talking about sparkling wine and specifically Cava, an incredibly approachable and affordable sparkling wine. If you're new to this channel, welcome. This is the Grape Explorer. Here we do wine education, product reviews and lots of wine tastings. So if you're interested in all things wine, consider subscribing. Cava is a sparkling wine produced in the country of Spain, and in this video we're going to go through a little bit about the history, where it's grown, the grapes that are involved in the production of Cava, the production methods itself, and then what you can expect when you finally get some of that good stuff in your glass. But first of all, let's take a little bit of a look at the history of Cava. Now, Cava has only really been produced in the last 150 years. It was inspired by the wines of Champagne, and it was first produced in 1872 by the head of the family firm Cordonnier. This particular producer had already been producing still wines for a number of years, but in 1872 they moved into the sparkling market. The early growth of the industry in Spain occurred at the same time as the arrival of phylloxera. And what you'll find is a lot of regions that were planted to a certain particular grape had to be pulled up and destroyed as a result of phylloxera, and new grape varieties were planted. And as it would turn out, they would be the ones that would be popular in Cava. So the vineyards were replanted with the key Cava grapes around that time. Previously known as Champagne, the term Cava was introduced in the 1970s to avoid any confusion with the Champagne and potentially to avoid any trademark infringements as well. Cava is of course the Spanish word for cellar. Now, unlike other sparkling wines such as Champagne or Prosecco, Cava has quite an interesting story when it comes to where it is produced. Unlike other Spanish denominations de origen, DOs, Cava is not restricted to a single delimited area. Instead, what that means is the production of Cava can take place in an agreed number of areas across Spain. These include Aragon, Castile and Leon, La Rioja, Navarra and Valencia. Although the vast majority of all Cava is produced in the Penedès area in Catalonia, and the industry's home is in the town of Sant Sadurní d'Anoia. And actually you'll find at least 90% of all Cava production is taking place in this one area. And actually, where I was just saying that Cava was the Spanish word for cellar, that's actually derived from the Catalonia word for cellar. And so looking at what it is that contributes to a glass of Cava, what are the grapes that are involved? We're actually referring to, certainly from a white grape perspective, the big three. They are Macabeo, Parellada and Xarello, and they all bring different qualities to the wine. Macabeo is light and aromatic. It tends to bud late, making it perfect for areas prone to spring frosts, and typically it will make up the majority of the wine in a Cava blend. Parellada is fresh and acidic and performs very well at areas subjected to altitudes. And then Xarello, strongly flavoured and more aromatic than the other two Cava main grapes. It's indigenous to Spain and it provides some earthy tones which can add some real characteristics to the wine. But whilst those are the big three in terms of the grapes used in Cava, there are actually some other grapes involved as well. So Chardonnay was authorised and permitted for use in the 1980s. You're also able to use some black grape varieties in your Cava, including Garnacha, Monastrell, Pinot Noir and Trepat. Although please note that Trepat can only be used where the Cava being produced is in a rosé style. And where those wines are being produced, they use what's referred to as the traditional method. Some might call it the Champagne method. And this for me is one of the reasons that I go and steer towards Cava when I'm looking for a great sparkling wine. Because whilst Cava has all the same production values of a Champagne, it doesn't have that associated price tag. But those production methods are, as I say, in the traditional method, meaning it requires a double fermentation process. The first fermentation of the base wine is mostly carried out in large stainless steel tanks, where the temperatures are of course carefully controlled. The different base wines are then going to be blended, bottled, and a mix of yeast or sugar, sometimes known as a tirage liqueur, is added, causing the second fermentation in bottle. It's that second fermentation in bottle that's going to be producing the carbon dioxide, which are going to be performing the signature bubbles you'd find in a Cava. The bottles are stored horizontally and are gradually tilted upside down and turned so that the yeast sediment is left in the neck, a process known as riddling. That sediment is then removed under a process called disgorgement. And you disgorge the yeast from the bottles by chilling the bottles so that the lees in the neck have frozen, and it's easier when ejected by pressure to get that cap removed. And then finally, the dosage, which is a liquid containing the wine and sugar, is added to the cava to make up the small amount of liquid lost during the disgorging process, and also to determine the type of cava that will be produced based on the amount of sugar in that dosage. And so when it comes to cava, there are different types of cava, as well as the way that we categorize cava as well. And we'll start off by looking at those types of cava, which are all based upon how much sugar is present in the wine. So there are 7 types of cava dependent upon the amount of sugar. They go from brut nature, which is natural sugars that can be found in the wine. There's no added sugar here. And they go through a number of different levels of sugar per litre, taking you from brut nature all the way to dolce, which is going to be a very sweet style of cava. You've then got the different categories of cava, and all of this is dependent upon the time cava has spent aging in the bottle. The minimum legal requirements for cava is that it must have been aged for a minimum of 9 months in bottle. You then go through a number of different styles, whether that be Reserva, Grand Reserva, and a relatively new classification called Parque Calificado, where the cava needs to have been aged for a minimum of 36 months, but it also needs to have been produced from vineyards with special characteristics of location and terroir that set them apart from other vineyards. And so the best advice that I can give you when picking out cavas is always pay particular attention to what's on the label. This particular one that I've got, and I've sourced this from the Wine Society here in the UK, is labelled Reserva and it's labelled Brut. That's telling me that it has been aged for a minimum of 18 months as part of that second fermentation. But it's also telling me with Brut on the label that it has between 6 and 12 grams of sugar per litre, which ultimately for this one means it's going to be quite a dry style of cava. But before I do get into this one, let's talk a little bit about some of the characteristics you might expect, particularly those aromas, whether it be from a cooler climate cava or a slightly warmer climate cava, as well as some of those all-important secondary aromas that you will have got from that traditional method of production. Cava in a cooler climate is going to display quince and citrus types aromas. Expect things like lemon and lime. And then moving into warmer climates, we might start to get things like peach, orange, or maybe even yellow apple. Those secondary aromas are going to be really present because of the yeast contact that's taken place as this wine has been on the lees. You can expect bread or brioche, and another popular descriptor would be something like almonds. So having taken a look at some of the aromas and a little bit of information about cava, what about what I've got in my glass? Let me give you a brief description of what I've got here. Like I say, a Reserva, a Brut, and just looking on the label here, it's been made for the Wine Society by Sumarroca, which is a small estate near Barcelona, who select the finest local grapes from their vineyards. And so with all that information, what am I getting on the nose here? Well, the thing that jumps out for me is something akin to a sort of appley, bready, lemony type aroma. But it is mostly fruit for me. I do get more fruit than I do those secondary aromas. Now I've had this one well chilled, it's been in the fridge for a little while, so it may take a little bit of time to open up. But it is incredibly fresh on the nose. And it's really enjoyable. I'm almost thinking like lemon biscuits or apple strudel, something along those lines. And then to taste it, sharp acidity. It really jumps out with apple on the palate. It's got nice acidity. I find this one to be a light-bodied wine, low in alcohol. It's got a nice finish with that acidity. Let's pour a little bit more. There we go, we'll get some of those bubbles going in the glass. What I find in with this one is it's the green apple flavour and then the associated acidity with green apple that's really hitting my palate in a great way. And Cava is really great as a food-friendly wine as well. The effervescence where I've just poured that really has a nice mousse in the mouth. Really fizzy sort of sensation, and it's an incredible tasting wine. And for me, Cava is a go-to for me, Particularly as someone who's quite budget conscious, I find more value in a bottle of Cava. I get a lot of enjoyment out of Cava. And because it's grown in so many different parts of Spain, that means there's a number of different ways and styles to enjoy it, which coming from different climates, different terroirs. And because of that, that's why I find Cava to be such an interesting sparkling wine. But let me know your own experiences with this drink. What's your experience of Cava? Let me know in the comments section below. I'm off to enjoy a glass of Cava right now on the Grape Explorer. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Cheers.